Good morning, everyone. As you are welcome here. Visitor, friend, or longtime member, you are welcome here. With little children, or your partner, or alone, we joyfully welcome you here. You are welcome here as believer or doubter, joiner or loner. You are welcome here. Feeling a part of us or not, full of energy or not, seeking a vision or a rest. You are welcome to join us as you are. We acknowledge that we are in the Aboriginal territories of the Salish, Nez Perce, Blackfeet, and Anishinaabe people who shared the Helena Valley as hunting grounds. The indigenous story of the Helena Valley began long before the arrival of Europeans. We honor those who walked here before us. We honor the path they have shown us in caring for this place for generations to come. We strive for justice and fair relations with their descendants. Liam, you want to come light the candle for us? The chalice lighting is in your order of service. May this light guide us by Jakaran Oloya. We light this chalice here in the darkness of winter as we wait. This temporary space is one filled with prayers to be answered, love to be given and received, miracles to be witnessed. May this light guide us until the light of the sun returns again. I know it's not quite winter, but solstice is coming up Wednesday, so I picked a solstice lighting for us. Go ahead and have a seat, Liam. Now we'll have our opening hymn, Down the Ages We Have Trod. It's number 2, and Singing the Living Tradition, the Gray Hymnal. Please stand as you're willing and able.
Down the ages we have trod, many paths in search of God, seeking ever to define the eternal and divine. Some have seen eternal good, pictured in parenthood, and a being throned above, ruling over us in love. There are others who proclaim God and nature are the same, and the present Godhead on, where creation's laws are known. There are eyes which best can see God within humanity, and God's countenance there trace, written in the human face. Where compassion is most found is for some the hallowed ground, and these paths they upward plod, teaching us that love is God. Though the truth we can't perceive, this at least we must believe. What we take most earnestly is our living deity. Our true God we there shall find in what claims our heart and mind,
Now is the time to share as a fellowship our heartfelt joys and concerns. This sharing will be permanently on YouTube. If you wish to share a more private joy or concern, there will be a second sharing after the extinguishing of the chalice. Does anyone have any joys or concerns to share this morning? Go sit, please.
For those of you who enjoyed Eldridge on our feeder, Eldridge has been making several appearances, including this morning, hopping up on the feeder. So life goes on.
My joy is that I did my Nutcracker performance yesterday, my first Nutcracker performance, and today I'm also gonna do it a second time. And my concern is that my older sister Summer is at home and sick, and I hope she gets better soon. Any more joys or concerns? Here you go, Vivi.
I have a joy that I'm also in the Nutcracker, and that I'm the lead mouse in the Nutcracker, and I have a concern that my sister is not feeling well.
Thank you, Vivian. And Liam.
So this week there has been in the news, and I'm sure many of you are aware of it, that there is a very strong potential that we can have a women's shelter this winter. And there has been funding provided for it, and Good Sam has stepped forward to organize it. And we are processing through the government permissions, and the city's zoning board last week approved it 4-1. And a number of people have objected to it, particularly business owners in that neighborhood who are worried about the downsides of having homeless people in their neighborhood. So tomorrow night at the City Commission will be the final vote on this issue. The City Commission meets at 6 until supposedly 7:30, although we think it might go longer because in certain circles this is not a popular thing. So to cut to the chase, we wrote a letter to the city commissioners in support of this critically needed shelter for women. And it was sent on behalf of our congregation, non-controversial in terms of all that we have been doing over the years to support this social justice thing. And the letter is under my signature. I put a copy on the name tag table if you're interested in what we had to say. And generally, the gist of it is, this is a convergence of will, place, financing, and opportunity. And as good Unitarians, we don't want to see this pass us by. After hours and thousands of hours of talk, this is an opportunity to actually do something to benefit people who are in critical need. So I wanted to let you know that that has been done, and we wanted to get that letter in ASAP so they could consider it over the weekend when they come to their votes. In addition to the UUs, the UCCs, the Presbyterians, the Methodists, and the Catholics have all written letters in support of this same thing. So we're not out there on a limb. We're with a bunch of good people.
Thank you, Cass. Now I have a brief reading for the offering. You Are the Holiday Miracle by Gwen Matthews. As December opens up before us, we welcome in the gift of reflection. We turn toward our holiday celebrations and search for common threads of meaning. We begin with Yule, the winter solstice, and we are invited to explore duality, cycles, and seasons, and to witness the Holly King being overcome by the Oak King. Yule reminds us that we all partake in the miracle of renewal. Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, commemorates a time of miracles when the faith of the Jewish people sustained them to reclaim their holy temple and keep the light of the menorah burning for 8 days. Christmas, the celebration of Jesus' humble birth in a manger, offers us to revisit the miracle of birth and the desire to find saviors to heal the scars of humanity. Here in our church, you are just as much a holiday miracle as the turning of the earth, as the persistence and dedication to a faith, as the creation of each new life. We see the love you give to others, the space you create to hold one another's joys and sorrows, and the generosity and spirit you entrust to this community. You are the holiday miracle. This community is one of miracle makers. Now we'll have our offering, followed by thank you for your loving hands from the Open Your Heart Songbook, page 25. Thank you for your gifts this day and for all the gifts of action that make this community possible. If you are visiting, please remain our guest. Your presence is your gift to us. Liam and Vivian. Now I'd like to invite the young and young at heart up front for the story for all ages, The Gift of Nothing by Patrick McDonald.
Me and my daddy got it just right to put up on a projector with his computer.
The Gift of Nothing. It was a special day, and Mooch wanted to give his best friend Earl a gift. But what to get him? He had a bowl. He had a bed. He had a Chewy toy. Squeak. He had it all. Mooch thought and thought. What do you get someone who has everything? Nothing. he would give Earl the gift of nothing. But in this world filled with so many somethings, where could he find nothing? Mooch often heard Frank say there was nothing on TV. But as far as Mooch could tell, there was always something on TV. Blah, 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 blah. Mooch often heard Doozy and her friends say there was nothing to do. But as far as Mooch could tell, everybody was always doing something. Millie came home from the store and said there was nothing to buy. So Mooch went shopping. And there's the stores.
And there was a ton to buy.
Yes. Mooch looked up and down every aisle. He found many, many, many somethings. The latest this, the newest that. But as far as he could tell, nothing was not for sale. So Mooch went home and sat on his pillow and just stayed still, as cats often do. And not looking for it, he found nothing. Purr. So he went and got a box and put nothing in it. Then Mooch thought, maybe Earl deserves more than this. So he got a bigger box. Now that's plenty of nothing. He's taken the box over to Earl's house. For me, said Earl. Mooch, you didn't have to give me anything. Who told him, thought Mooch. Earl opened Mooch's gift. Eh? There's nothing here, said Earl. Yes, said Mooch. Nothing but me and you. Big hug. So Mooch and Earl just stayed still and enjoyed nothing and everything. The end. Good morning, everyone. I want to start out by doing a quick poll by show of hands. Who has heard of Chalica? Who has celebrated Chalica? Who has no idea what Chalica is? I'll start off by briefly defining Chalica for those who may not know or need a refresher. Chalica is, or was, a uniquely Unitarian Universalist holiday created in 2005. Chalica is a 7 or 8 day celebration that begins on the first Monday or Sunday of December, with one day focused on each of the 7 or 8 UU principles, depending on whether your congregation has adopted the 8th principle. To quote an article from UU World magazine in 2009, and what is Chalica exactly? It's an invitation to spend a day with each of the principles, reflecting on their meaning and doing a good deed focused on each one. For instance, the Chalica website suggests that since today, Monday, is all about the first principle, worth and dignity, it would be a good time to make an apology or forgive someone. And Tuesday, justice, equity, and compassion could be marked by working at a food pantry, while Sunday, the interdependent web, would be a good day to make a compost pile or rescue an animal. A chalice is to be lit each day, Gifts may be given during the week, but they could be notes or small handmade items. The holiday is designed to end on Sunday with a worship service at church. I went to the Unitarian Universalist Association website to update myself on Chalica. We've had a few services here about it before from Nikki Twitchell and several others. I knew my knowledge on Chalica was a bit dated, as I hadn't read much on it since many congregations had adopted the 8th principle, or since the work of the UUA's Article 2 Study Commission. One big question I had was, how might observance of Chalica change should the UUA replace the 7 principles with the proposed new 7 values? I found this statement on the UUA website. In 2005, Chalica emerged out of a well-intentioned desire to have a new winter holiday organized around Unitarian Universalist principles. In the years that followed, however, UUs began voicing discomfort that this created holiday, celebrated over the course of 7 days, felt like a harmful appropriation of holidays like Kwanzaa and Hanukkah. In anti-oppression spaces, it's often said that when you know better, you do better. Out of respect for faith traditions and people who have been historically marginalized, we encourage Unitarian Universalists to refrain from engaging in Chalica-related activities and to use these new understandings to help us recognize appropriation. Now, the same UU World article I cribbed the definition of Chalica from also briefly addressed appropriation. Quote, if you notice some similarities to other December holidays, Hanukkah and Kwanzaa, they're not intentional, says Marshall. There's been a bit of discussion on Facebook about whether Chalica is misappropriation of other holidays. It's not, the Reverend Lisa Schwartz of the UU Fellowship of Topeka, Kansas concluded in online remarks. I see Chalica as an evolutionary celebration. It seems a fun and lighthearted way to fight the commercialization of our culture, introduce family ritual into homes, and deepen UU's understanding of our principles all at the same time. But does that rebuttal really take on the issue of cultural appropriation? As religious educator Jackie James stated in a 2001 essay, appropriation is a broad and sensitive issue that Unitarian Universalism has struggled with for some time. Really, if any religion doesn't struggle with it, they should. There's probably no such thing as a pure religion or a pure culture. Everyone has appropriated something. Again, this is a sensitive and controversial topic to UUs, as we frequently incorporate ritual and spirituality from other cultures. Our concern is whether we do so authentically and not in unethical, oppressive ways. One definition of cultural appropriation is to consciously or unconsciously seek to emulate concepts, beliefs, or rituals that are foreign to a particular framework, individual or collective. It is incorporating language, cultural expressions, forms, lifestyles, rituals, or practices about which there is little basis for direct knowledge, experience, or authenticity into one's being. It is also the superficial appreciation of culture without regard to its deeper meaning. Misappropriation can be surprisingly easy to do. In this age of instant information, there are so many sources, including books, music, meditation, and rituals, that can be as easily accessed as they can be misinterpreted. One only needs to look to the Bible and its numerous versions and incarnations to see the challenges presented by frequent interpretation and reinterpretation of source material. Speaking of Christianity, we know that it is probably the reigning world's champion in appropriating other cultures into their own worship. We all know the aspects of pagan worship that have been wrapped up into holidays like Christmas and Easter. Many other religions have taken the same path, gathering up rituals and symbolism from tribal belief systems that existed at the time of the religion's emergence. James's essay offers 10 questions to ask oneself to determine if a borrower is misappropriating culture. First, how much do I know about this particular tradition? How do I respect it and not misinterpret it? Second, what do I know of the history and experience of the people from whom I am borrowing? Third, is this borrowing distorting, watering down, or misinterpreting the tradition? Fourth, is the meaning changed? Fifth, is this overgeneralizing this culture? Remind yourself that any culture could be quite diverse. When pieces of culture are taken out of context, robbing them of their power and meaning, problems arise. Sixth, what is the motivation for cultural borrowing? What is being sought and why? Seventh, how do the owners of the tradition feel about the pieces of the tradition being borrowed? Eighth, if artifacts and or rituals are being sold, where does the money go? Ninth, is this really spiritually healthy for Unitarian Universalists? When we as a religious tradition borrow rituals from other cultures, we lose the significant meaning they take on from the common community in which they are based. we risk becoming impersonators. Finally, how can we acknowledge rather than exploit the contributions of all people? It seems to me that the best way to approach many of these questions is to get as close to the source, what James calls the owners of the traditions, as possible. In thinking about appropriation, I started to conceptualize a metaphor of a garden. Now, I think we all know that a person's garden can be very personal to them. Suppose in your garden there's a particular rose that you've grown from the same plant that was in your grandmother's garden. She used to cut a few of those roses and put them in a vase on the kitchen table. And it's a very stirring and evocative memory for you to recall the scent of those roses along with the scent of Grandma's chocolate chip cookies baking. How would you want someone to approach the idea of taking one of those roses? The purest form of borrowing would likely be you sharing a bloom with someone you've invited into your garden and have talked with about the significance of the rose. But what if the attempt at sharing the rose doesn't originate with you offering it to someone, but rather that someone has seen it and wants to borrow it themselves? To the eye of an outsider, the flowers are quite beautiful, but the outsider has no sense of the context of the roses, what they mean to the person who planted and nurtured them. If someone wanted to cut one of your roses or even take a picture of them, you would most likely want them to come to you first so you can tell them about your roses. Even if they didn't, you would want them to take care in harvesting one of the dozens of blooms so as not to harm the plant or any other nearby growth in your garden. I think the most important aspect of cultural misappropriation is who gets to call it out, who gets to blow the whistle or throw the trespass flag on the field, to borrow a football metaphor. I can only conclude that it is never the trespasser. That's why the dismissal that Chalica is appropriation that was offered earlier by Reverend Schwartz rings so hollow. She never really said why Chalica isn't appropriation, only why it shouldn't matter if it is or not. Her premise is not necessarily incorrect. It is very likely that anyone and everyone involved in creating, developing, and spreading Chalica had no ill intent. Unfortunately, ill intent is not a necessary element of cultural appropriation. Some of the most culturally violative actions ever undertaken by governments or churches were done with the best of intentions. I'll finish with some words from author Max Warren that I found in several sources about cultural appropriation. Our first task in approaching another people, another culture, another religion, is to take off our shoes, for the place we are approaching is holy, else we find ourselves treading on another's dream. More serious still, we may forget that God was there before our arrival. We'll have a minute of silent meditation and follow with any reflections anyone wants to share. Does anyone have any reflections, questions, anything they want to share?
So maybe this is ignorance on my part. I haven't done a lot of Chalica celebrating, but what's being appropriated? Just lights and candles in December?
I think that's the main concern, yes.
But, so I'm not supposed, on Thursday nights, Paul and I light candles and we sit on our bench and we look at the, I'm a little befuddled.
I was as well.
Just to answer that, I think like Chalica, I mean, it sounds like Hanukkah, and also, and like the 8 days. That's what I want to know. Like, that sounds appropriated to, like, the amount of time, is this right?
Okay. Unless you only have 7.
Also, the UU World article mentioned that one of the things that helped popularize Chalica in the early years is somebody put a clip on YouTube of what they called the Chalica song, which was just redoing the lyrics of Adam Sandler's Hanukkah song.
So Greg, first I want to thank you for bringing this up. I had no idea that UUA was, I think they're abolishing Chalica, right? Is that? Okay. And I remember when I first heard about it, I think it was Nikki Twitchell who gave some wonderful services on what it was and the things that she was doing with her daughter Charlotte to do something once a day that was a giving, charitable, thank you note, whatever. And so I really liked the way that Nikki was incorporating it. But when I first heard it and continued to think, I thought, oh, we don't need one more. What if every religion creates their own Christmas celebration or wintertime celebration? This is just going to get too much. And for those of us who have had children, we've sort of, at least for me, weathered those kinds of things, because you start out with the babe and it's like, oh, we got to do Santa. And then in a few years, you're like, oh no, my kids need to understand that gifts come between family members who love each other, and Santa doesn't exist, and it's not magic. It is a giving and receiving holiday. Just so I think that Unitarianism is based in both Jewish and Christian roots, and there's plenty of material there to create and shape how you celebrate the winter holidays.
So for those who don't know me, I'm Joe Naaman Sessions, longtime UU member. Glad to see some familiar faces and some new faces. And I think this is really an interesting conversation. I think everything is worth introspection and evaluation of its worth, and if it's contributing to our spiritual life or everyday life. And this is an excellent talk in that regard too, to say what is the value of Chalica. I do think it's important to remember, because to me, two of the sources kind of speak to this a little bit here too, and I was looking them up: the wisdom from the world's religions, which inspire us to ethical and spiritual life, and the Jewish and Christian teachings, which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors and ourselves. And so while it's appropriation, I wonder a little bit where it's like, are we also responding to our callings of our own sources in the foundation of UU by respecting and trying to incorporate elements of other religions into our own holiday? So it's just, I don't know, it would have been really interesting to be a fly on the wall as UUA was discussing this. I also wonder too, had this been a holiday that came from UUA, that had gone through thoughtful deliberation in the beginning and maybe not just more of a grassroots thing, if it would have been more universally accepted across all of UU, and it may have been something that didn't get as dismissed as easily, because I do think there is a lot of value in family tradition and the thought of Chalica, like Georgia was saying. I think I first heard about it from Gemma Hazen when she was celebrating it with her family, and I think there's a lot that goes into what our family traditions and how we're passing on our own principles to our kids, and holidays have a lot to do with it. And incorporating the 7 principles during the holiday season when they're being bombarded by commercialism, there's a lot of value to that.
Me, thank you. I've been around UUs for probably about 30 years in cities and big churches and in rural areas. And over the years, I think that what strikes me the most is, of course, diversity and originality and imagination and expression of imagination. And my feeling, you know, I could almost call it my bias, but I found roots in Unitarianism that inspire me with transcendentalism. So I find a lot of liberation in celebrating of equinox and other things that are really pagan, really outside of the realm of course, Jewish tradition is also pagan. So, but anyway, Thoreau, Emerson, and my favorite poet, Carl Sandburg, among others. So this is kind of where I feel that I'm most at home, is that waiting for the next great inspiring idea that someone in the group puts forth, and the cooperation of people behind it. It's just great. Thank you.
So I'm thinking about cultural appropriation, and also thinking about us as critters who live on this same world and witness a lot of the same things. For instance, winter solstice, the coming of the light, and that we're all moved to celebrate things that are meaningful to us. And so, and I'm also reflecting on the world of artists. And one of the things we say is there's nothing original. We're exposed to the entire world of activity, and we often appropriate other ideas and put our own special spin to make them personally meaningful. And so this idea of, there's something about the words cultural appropriation that sound like someone's being accused of stealing. And I just don't buy it. I think that we respond to our circumstances, we search for truth and meaning. If some methods of doing that resemble other methods, well, big surprise. We're all here on the earth doing our thing. So, and the thing with Chalica is that if this is a meaningful thing to do in our congregation, well, why not? And maybe doing it at Christmas isn't necessarily, I mean, it is a crowded field already. Maybe we could do it other times of the year, but I think bringing it to particularly our kids, and well, ourselves too, that we spend a week observing each principle and performing some act that reflects that, that's a really great idea. So I don't think it should be ditched necessarily, but I just get a little rankled about this exclusivity about how we celebrate our being in this world.
And that's something that was hit upon in some of the articles I read about this too, where there's a lot that's defined cultural misappropriation as kind of a trespass, but others kind of divided it as base level as plagiarism, which of course can be obviated simply by crediting the source. And maybe that's something that wasn't done in the early days of Chalica enough in order to remove the stain of appropriation from it. Is there anyone on this side? We've been kind of focused on the other side.
The best source of flattery is imitation.
Yes.
I said a few weeks ago, before the talk I gave, that a lot of what we do here is about tradition. And I loosely quoted Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof when he said, "Without tradition, our lives are as shaky as a fiddler on the roof." And that's true. But tradition is also a binding thing that basically traps us into a particular way of thinking or doing. And if we happen to be the first that come up with a holiday or a week celebration, then we think we own it. And I completely agree with Cass. Yeah, it's a crowded field, but for God's sakes, I mean, we are all on the same planet. And there is only one solstice that affects all of us. Nobody appropriated that, it just happens. So I think we're a little sensitive to that, and maybe it's the UUA's job as our overseer to say, well, you know, we're not doing something politically correct. It's not our job as this fellowship to be politically correct. It's our job to do things that are meaningful. And in my opinion, anything we do that reinforces and reminds us of those 7 principles is a very good thing. So call it what you want and celebrate it whenever you want, but those 7 principles are the core of who we are. And we have every bit as much right to celebrate that as anyone in any faith does to celebrate their particular tradition.
Having been a member and attended many different types of Unitarian Universalist churches and fellowships and congregations around the country, each one has its own flavor. I mean, they're all distinctly different. You know, we're all, as Cass called us, critters. Each farm has its own makeup of critters. And so that really does make a difference in the kinds of traditions or ritual that those different congregations take on. Sometimes they're more, much more strongly rooted in the Judeo path. Sometimes it's more Christian, and sometimes it's much more pagan. Sometimes it's a really lovely blend of all of those things. The beauty that I find in, I guess, the difference between appropriation and then if you add a little imagination there, the word that comes to my mind is innovation, right? We innovate as humans. That's how we progress. That's how we move forward. And it makes sense to me that we would innovate a ritual or a tradition to make it our own, and that's going to look different in every single gathering. And that's okay, and actually that's kind of a really beautiful part of what we do. I think the other piece that I was thinking about as far as Chalica is, I think the taste that is just a little off when I think about it is that it kind of began a little bit flip, right? It was an innovation of a tradition or a ritual, and it was kind of done in a flip way, and not really taking into consideration what is the depth of the meaning behind some of the symbols and some of the things that were created into and made into Chalica. And I think that that's the piece where it feels a little bit off for me personally. And it's not ever something that I ever practiced. I knew about it, I've read about it, I've read all sorts of articles in the UU world about it, and it just would never resonated with me. But I can definitely see it resonating in different congregations in different ways.
Definitely, yes. And one definition of tradition that I saw recently is peer pressure from dead people. So.
Greg, I'd like to thank you for bringing this subject today, because I don't think we've ever had this robust a discussion in our sanctuary on UU, something that has happened in our UU that has come from, quote, above, this idea of practicing a Chalica. And this is great. It's going to give me something to chew on all week and perhaps all year.
So is this the spirit of the directive to inform what congregations as a whole celebrate in a public space, or does it reach to how families celebrate in their own homes?
It seems that the language was directed toward Unitarian Universalists at an individual level, but it didn't necessarily mention congregations. But I don't imagine that a directive would get down to the individual level in that manner very well. If someone has established that as a tradition in their family, then that's their tradition. I mean, we talk about the various sources of Unitarian Universalism, Judeo-Christian, other world religions, earth-based religions, paganism, but when it comes down to it, each individual comes with their own religious roots. We have a lot of different refugees from other religions that didn't start out as Unitarian Universalists that may have traditions and rituals from those faiths that are part of their tradition. So that's not something that could be easily rooted out at this point, I think.
I just have a perspective on the wording in this proclamation. It's asking you not to. It's not saying don't. Oh, I'm sorry. They're asking you not to do it. They're not saying do it. I've spent enough time working in the government where regulations are should, may, must. This falls in the should, which means it's up to you. Yes. And I think that's the way we should read it. It's up to whoever wants to involve themselves. And, you know, be it.
And we'll stop it there. By the way, there is, it was in 2009 was created another specifically Unitarian Universalist holiday called Luminescence that you may not have heard of. It's celebrated the third Sunday of February. And I'd be happy to do a service on that later on, or something you can look into yourself. I haven't much more than scratched the surface of it. It's something I came across while I was researching this service, but it has not been accused of being appropriative of any other traditions. Now we'll have our closing hymn, which is Spirit of Life, number 123, in Singing the Living Tradition. Please stand as you're willing and able. Changes abound around us, within us, between us, in our communities, our neighborhoods, in our beloved faith communities. Changes abound. May we each find the balance point we need as we move through our ever-changing world. The balance between the old and the new, between the known and the unknown, between the familiar and the perhaps bold and risky possibilities that may be there waiting. And we'll extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Now we'll end the YouTube broadcast of our service. We'll have a brief testimonial